Today's topic, we are going to be discussing charging systems that incorporate microchannel coil technology. The first thing that I would really want to say to you in terms of practice, a habit that I would want to see you getting into, is slow down. You don't want to attempt to add pounds of charge by just using superheat or subcooling, things like that. Like let's say, you know, you're used to charging by superheat. You're used to a fixed bore piston as the metering device. Well, now suddenly you're up against a TXV. Well, I remember guys talking about you got to charge a TXV by subcooling. I'm really not that comfortable with subcooling. All of a sudden, you kind of feel like you're out of your comfort zone there. There's an old saying that I believe kind of really originates in the military. I know it's kind of a catchphrase that's even been used in movies, but it does really make a good point, and that is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Okay, so slow down when it comes to charging microchannel coils in split systems. Method number one, the primary method that we'll always recommend, will be calculating your charge. Using the QRD, calculate that charge and then add that refrigerant by weight. You can also then verify and check your charge using the charging charts that are going to come included in the installation instructions for that piece of equipment. So literature-wise, number one, that will be our primary means of charging microchannel systems. You'll also discover the more times that you charge by weight, the more comfortable, the more familiar you are with charging refrigerant by weight, you'll actually discover that it is actually really rather quick and efficient. When it comes to charging systems with microchannel coils, guys will ask, is there a way for us to check and verify charge beyond just what's on papers? Or maybe even options that we might have been more accustomed to in earlier years of lower SEER equipment in heating and air conditioning. One of those items that I think a lot of guys have probably seen is one of these guys right here. This is just a slide calculator. This particular one here is for R410A. I have it on the Superheat side. You know, I won't extend the length of the video by going too much into how you use a slide chart. If you are going to use a slide calculator and you are going to fine tune by Superheat, it's critical that you know what your indoor wet bulb is. So that will require that you have a psychrometer to be able to accomplish that. Please don't do the wet rag over the end of a thermometer and try to stick it into the return, all that kind of business. I don't like that. Use modern tools and instrumentation to get the information that you need. You could either do that through Superheat or through subcooling. A lot of guys will say if it's a piston, you have to use Superheat. If it's a TXV, you have to use subcooling. Well, that's true and not true. You can check superheat and subcooling on anything. Doesn't matter what your metering device is. That's kind of become one of those things that, well, you know, throughout history, if you will, it's been repeated enough times that it just kind of becomes part of the lexicon where, you know, it's just accepted. Well, if it's a TXV, you're only looking at subcooling. If it's a piston, you're only looking at superheat. But that's not really entirely true. But the use of a slide calculator to check and verify your charge is another option. And another option, one that really is maybe more of a current modern version that I think just about anybody could really relate to, would be the use of a smartphone. Most guys out there in the field now will have a smartphone on them. It kind of has become the standard of most devices that technicians are carrying. And really, quite frankly, if you're kind of in that camp where you're thinking that something like a modern smartphone is, you know, purely there is for entertainment, distraction, sending text messages, or making and taking phone calls, you're really just kind of scratching the surface of the power and the usability and the convenience of a device like a modern smartphone is. And so one of the things that I'm showing you here is another, again, this is just alternate means of checking charge, verifying charge levels, doing some charging troubleshooting in systems. Guys seem to think that there's something special or something really odd or different about doing it with microchannel coils. That is absolutely not true. You just want to slow down. Take your time. But in this case here, what I'm showing you guys, this is a free charging app that is done by Emerson Climate Technologies. You may also know them as Copeland, if you will, for Copeland compressors. But this is their charging app here. Let's say a slide calculator wasn't available to us out in the field, but we had our phone. So if we wanted to just do some quick charge verification. So for this example here, we're going to select R410A as our refrigerant. And let's say that we're just verifying what our charge is doing by using Superheat. So we're going to measure our indoor wet bulb using our psychrometer. And let's make that 66 degrees, and we'll select that. And then we're going to input our outdoor condenser dry bulb temperature. And we'll make that 85 degrees, and we'll select it. And then we're going to be looking at our gauge set, and we're going to input what our vapor pressure is. Let's make that 134 psig. And then we're going to enter what our actual vapor line temperature is. And let's make that 60 degrees. And then we'll calculate it. Okay, and as you can see, with the data numbers that we input into the app, it said that we are currently operating at 14 degrees of superheat, and we had a recommended superheat level of 15 degrees, and it looks like we are certainly right about where we need to be in this instance here. So again, this is just an example of the options and the tools that are available to you when you are out in the field as far as charging the system and then verifying that charge using Superheat or subcooling, using the charging chart in the installation instructions, and then also the calculation using the QRD. I don't want this episode to end without also discussing the importance of airflow when it comes to correctly charging, you know, really any system, if you will, but in particular, modern higher efficiency systems and those that incorporate microchannel coils. Because in the QRD, we will point out to you in the matchup what the rated airflow for a given matchup is. So I'll just point to a few examples here. In this example, you know, this matchup here is calling for 960 CFM. Here we're calling for 1140 CFM. If you are not in the practice of having the tools and instrumentation to really be able to measure and quantify what your airflow is, you are going to see over time, not just with microchannel coils, but in terms of the increase in SEER efficiency of particularly split equipment, that you are going to struggle to be able to really nicely fine-tune those systems because you're going to be trying to solely do that tuning by adding or removing charge. And you throw in another wrinkle into the fabric there by adding things in like TXVs, and you only compound the opportunity then for you to struggle and take inordinate amounts of time to be able to try to get the system where you end up wanting it to be. Because guys just kind of run out of patience. They get it to a point to where they just kind of say, well, I think that's just the best I can do. You know, 16 degrees of temperature drop across the evaporator, or 17 degrees, what have you. That's just the best that I can do. R410A doesn't work as well as R22 ever did. You know, they come up with, they find that reason to say this is as good as it's going to get. I'm going to go ahead and pack it in now from here. So I cannot stress enough to you the importance of using the QRD to find those airflow values, and then having those tools and the instrumentation available to you in the field to be able to actually take those data points, quantify that information, and then be able to make the necessary adjustments that you need so that you know that you are delivering the amount of cubic feet of air that that system demand is going to require. So that's really it in a nutshell. Let's just summarize again one more time in terms of charging. First recommendation is going to be calculation using the QRD, and then you're going to be adding that charge by weight. You'll weigh it into the system using a refrigerant charging scale. You'll quantify, double check your work using the charging chart in the installation instructions. And then if you're looking for additional tools, if you're looking for backups, alternate means of being able to check your charge levels, there's absolutely, nothing wrong with just checking or troubleshooting your charge by the use of a slide chart just like this one. I don't want to recommend to you that you attempt to add pounds worth of refrigerant. Like, let's say you've got 3 or 4 pounds to go. I don't want to advise that you try to do that solely by the use of something like a slide chart. That becomes inefficient and takes up too much time, in my opinion, quite frankly. But it's a means of just checking, verifying charge, or troubleshooting, something like a slide chart. And then, last but not least, a smartphone for access to something like an app. This type of a device right here, I know it's so easy to say, it's just my phone. It's actually so much more than that. If you're just sending text messages or looking at silly YouTube clips on your phone, you're really only scratching the surface of the capabilities of a device just like this one here. Flex its muscle, so to speak, and get the information that you need to be that good modern tech out there in the field. I hope that you found today's episode interesting. Thanks again for watching.